Thank you for joining us. This is a session on accessory dwelling units. My name, Mike Melanowski. I'm a consultant to AIA California, chair of the AIA California's Plus One House org website, resource, and design professional network. It happens I'm also a principal of an architectural firm that does many ADUs. So I'm in the trenches with you who are design professionals and moving projects forward. I'm very happy to be here moderating this gathering today. ADUs are a topic of increasing interest, not just in California, but nationally as well. Maybe some of you were also on a webinar put on by the White House just a couple of days ago. I was on that. It included experts from around the country with discussions on how financing and supporting this kind of infill housing, it's really a key part of the national strategy to increase our housing stock. And AI and California is really among the leaders in the country. There was some graphs or graphics in that White House webinar that showed that we're really right at the bleeding edge in moving this housing type forward. ADUs are really not new. They've been around for many decades. I personally have done accessory dwellings even as long as 30 years ago. But there is new support in the legal and regulatory infrastructure in California. And that has inspired new interest on the part of homeowners and helped make our state a national hotspot for ADUs. I really believe this is a really clever concept because what we're essentially doing in California is we're activating private money, leveraging existing land and individual homeowners who then become small-scale housing developers. When it works, the model can produce very cost-effective infill housing. But of course, design, permitting, construction of ADUs are not without their challenges. And today we're going to hear a full plus delta perspective. We're going to hear about both the positive side and the challenge side, and we expect a robust exchange today of facts, ideas, issues, and opportunities. A few quick housekeeping reminders. Please mute yourself when you're not participating in the discussion to avoid any background noise. Use the Q&A feature, not the chat box, to ask any questions for today's panelists. And you can also use that feature to like a question that somebody else may have posted, which will move it up in the list. We're going to try to answer as many questions as time will allow, but we have in the presentation already identified a hot list of topics that will get us into some of the details, and we'll be hearing from some of the top experts in the state, sharing their knowledge as well as their opinions. This session qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW learning units for those of you who look for those. When you finish the session, AI staff can help report those for you. We do plan to put the webinar content and additional resources on the AIA California website shortly after the session. This session is brought to you by AIA California as a member benefit to our 11,000 members. We serve as the voice of the architectural profession in California, and we're here today in collaboration with the California Housing and Community Development Department and the California Energy Commission. We're going to start our program with some case study examples. That's a great way to see images and hear from design professionals who will share some personal and professional experience in shaping ADUs in California. We'll also hear from our state experts as panelists on what the legal and regulatory framework that supports ADUs in California is like today and as it's evolving and the resources available, as well as some of the options that design professionals may have to address disconnects, conundrums, and what crop up as barriers to ADUs. You're also welcome to post comments in the Q&A as we go along. With so many people attending this, I suspect we're going to run out of time long before we run out of questions and comments. My hope as moderators to keep us rolling forward at a brisk pace to cover as much territory as we can in the 90 minutes we've set aside on the journey we're taking together today. Now, I'd like to quickly introduce presenters and panelists before we get started. We have with us today as panelists, Tom Martin from California's Housing and Community Development Department. Tom is a leader there in the Housing Code Standard Division. Greg Nicholas, also with California Housing and Community Development in their Housing Policy Division. And those of you working in ADUs, I'm sure recognize Greg's name because he's been very prominent in the ADU landscape. Javier Perez from the California Energy Commission is here today with us as well. And our case study design professionals who volunteer to put forward some examples of their projects include Charles Eli, FAIA, who is an architect and engineer, well-known nationally, the primary author actually of the world's first zero carbon code, Adam Mayberry, AIA, Jefferson Shearbeek, AIA, Warren Scott, AIA, and Ted Tiffany. So with that, I've asked the presenters to try and work within a 5-minute budget, which should use up about 30 minutes of our time. That's the goal, but I'm sure each of them could easily spend 5 times that talking about even just these few projects that we're going to see. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Charles. Charles, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Mike, very much. Now this is, go to the next slide, please, Rebecca. This is a small ADU, about 500 square feet. It's separate from the main house, and it's all electric. It doesn't have a separate meter, though. The electricity is through the main house's meter. And when an ADU is separate from the main house, the California Building Energy Efficiency Standards treat this as a separate single-family home, and this triggered quite a few issues. Go to the next slide, Rebecca. One of the issues is that, as you probably know, the California Building Energy Efficiency Standards require solar on new single-family homes, and because of the side yard setbacks and so forth, the south-facing and also the Homeowners Association, we needed to match the hip roof and so forth. So we had very limited south roof area, and it would have been very, very difficult to meet the requirement for solar. But as part of a separate project, I had recommended an 8 kilowatt solar system for the main house. And so we worked with the building department and said, okay, well, these are 2 separate permits, but we want to allocate some of the solar production from the main house to the ADU, and they agreed with that approach, but the code itself is not explicit about that, and so that was one of the issues that we needed to deal with. Next slide, Rebecca. Another issue being all electric, and as most of you know, I'm sort of an energy geek. I wanted to use a heat pump water heater, but we have very small loads in this ADU. The only hot water load is there's a single shower, and there's a lavatory in the bar area, the kitchenette area, and there's another lavatory in the bathroom, and that's it. So anyway, the smallest heat pump water heater that I could find was about 40 gallons. It's much larger than we need. And but a larger issue is that these units are pretty noisy, and you need to and in this case they need to exchange air with the main room, so you need a louvered door behind the water heater, or in front of the water heater. And anyway, they generate around 50, maybe 55 decibels of noise when they're when they're running. It's enough to wake you up, you know, if you're sleeping. So this was an issue that we had to deal with. Next slide, please. The one of the last issue I'm going to talk about is attic ventilation. The width of this ADU is only 18 feet, and we needed a 4 and 12 roof pitch to match existing house. And the California Bees requires R19 in the roof and R49 in the floor of the attic where this ADU is located. And it leaves a very, very small ventilation area, as you can see. I at first dealt with this by including all of the HVAC ducts entirely within the building envelope, and that seemed to work. But then the HVAC contractor made a last minute change and put ducts in the attic, which triggered a few other issues. So anyway, we had a few issues also with the Homeowners Association. They rejected the project initially. We needed to cite the legislation, and they backed off on that. When the project was under construction, we used some liquid applied waterproofing, which was roughly the color of my insulation in this attic. And we got a few calls from the Homeowners Association about that. But in the end, next slide, final slide, Rebecca. It turned out they're pretty happy with the unit. We were able to match the roof tiles, the roof slope, the wall surface materials, and the clients are also very happy with it. So I'll stop there and pass the baton over to Adam Mayberry.
Thanks, Charles. Like you said, I'm Adam Mayberry from Mayberry Workshop. I want to talk briefly about our ADU project here. This is in the Rose Garden in San Jose. Our wonderful client here really helped us and encouraged us to explore the shape and the kind of styling of the project. Here's a couple of the renderings and different views of this. Most notably, the section. You know, our client at the time was curating art and has a big art collection. He mainly wanted this extra space for his family and more connected to the yard. His main house was a typical smaller cottage style home that didn't have a great connection between the living, kitchen, dining area and the yard space. So there's that in another area for kids to play and whatnot. Really wanted that second bedroom and like loft space. Since we couldn't do a second story, we tried to do a mezzanine here. Through the process of this project, codes were changing with the city of San Jose specifically, and really from the state as well. So being involved with some of the policy from the beginning of the city, we were up on those changes coming through, and new second story and second bedroom were going to be added. You can go on to the next slide to show from the rendering here to what was built. So some of the issues we had here was that at the time, San Jose had a roof slope second story height that artificially reduced the size. I think it was like 22 feet, but that's to the midpoint of the slope. And if you did the math on a standard 2-story wood frame construction, we couldn't get a second story that had, you know, normal clearance, the head height. So we had sort of a low sloped roof in the bedroom area. But kind of worked through with the city, and now I think having 24-foot tall really starts to make a 2-story volume work well for the city. You know, as I said, our client curated art, not only art you hang on walls, but also art you paint on walls. The photo on the left was actually from his own social media, but he's got a wonderful mural that wraps the side of the ADU, and you know, the artist took the color palette we already had and extended it to the side of the nice canvas we had with the white stucco, which made it beautiful. You could go on to the next slide there too. Just briefly show some of the interior of this. So he carried art at Facebook actually, and some of you may recognize the staircase. It's sort of our interpretation of some of the Geary staircases throughout the Facebook open campus and stairwells, using the very utilitarian plywood to wrap the staircase. And yeah, it's a great space to use for family and friends, and really adding to their property here. We can go to the next slide for me to wrap it up. I think we're well under 5 minutes here, but I just wanted to quickly mention, we do a ton of ADUs. We've been around about 4 years in total, and we're consistently growing, and I wouldn't be able to achieve what we have with the firm without our team. So I just want to quickly mention those other architects out there working for us and say thanks. So yeah, we could send this over now to Jefferson Skierbeek and listen to what his ADU is about.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. Probably like everybody else, I'll just go through the sort of facts and timelines to kind of get up to speed and then talk about challenges. So our ADU is in Mar Vista, California. The design was started in June of 2019 and construction started right at the beginning of COVID at February of 2020. And our final C of O on this project was just recently obtained. Next slide. Background facts, a young couple, and of course, expecting a baby, were looking at how they might expand their house and do it in a way that they didn't have to move out. So they looked at an ADU as that additional space. They also wanted to try to maintain, as you can see, as much backyard as possible. So we proposed building the ADU on top of the garage. So we added a 400 square foot ADU over a 360 square foot garage with an additional 60 square foot of storage space. Next slide. The challenges that we faced were fairly straightforward in some ways. The setbacks, and people have talked about, Michael talked about having done ADUs for a long time. Well, in Los Angeles, they're maybe a little less done, and it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that they've been allowed. And during that time, the code has changed several times. And one of the code changes, which I think impacted this, was because it was being called at the time a residential building, it had an increase of a 1 foot side yard setback because we were going to a second story. The rear yard for the ADU was only 5 feet, but that caused kind of something else. So next slide. What ended up happening is as we were going through the process, the plan checker didn't ever actually ask us to get a public utility clearance, and there was no public utility easement shown on the map. So during construction, we found the inspector required a public utilities sign off, and when the DWP sent their person out, they're like, you're going to be too close to the power lines. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the upper left image where we had to press down the roof from a single flat shed roof to a flat section over the bathroom and the entryway to accommodate the challenge of the public utility clearance. The other issue that we faced, the client did want to go all electric. They have not yet done solar on it, but wasn't required at the time. But we did talk about water heaters and the options that are available. We had, in a previous project, used an inline gas hot water heater, and in our naivete had put a preheat solar panel on the roof and got it to comply with Title 24. But in the end, in a remodel of the house, we found out that we had to increase the power, the amperage to the facility so much that it was actually cost prohibitive. So we pulled out that water heater and put in a tanked electric hot water heater. And so from that lesson, we did the same here. And we're able to put that in and comply. So next slide. So just some images of the looking in the upper left-hand corner is looking to the rear of the house with the ADU above the garage. And the lower left image is obviously the ADU over the garage with the privacy screen around the entry as you walk up the stair. And the image on the right shows that sort of lowered roof and the utility lines. And that was probably the big challenge and the interesting to have to address. And next slide. And there's an image of the ADU from the rear yard. The garage door is not quite done. The client, as his want, is going to make the garage basically into a wood shop and is putting different doors on it. So thank you very much. And I think I'm passing it over to Warren Scott.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Warren Scott. I have a Warren Scott Architecture in Encinitas, California. I'm going to present a couple items here today. The first one is an ADU, and we've done several ADUs, but I wanted to present this one as a one that we found very workable. It's 875 square feet, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And we try to keep it real simple. It's 25 by 35 dimensions, and it's split basically down the middle. So we create a great room living area on one side and 2 bedrooms and bath on the other. We try to minimize corridors and layout and so on. So it's a very simple, efficient type unit. And we combine the plumbing and mechanical to the bottom side of that to it's all kind of a joint area, keep some of the costs down. This one we actually put a roof deck on. That's kind of an option. This one actually has an ocean view, as you can see maybe behind me. I don't know, that's my ocean view, but I'll show you in the next slide. The other option here is that we can do slope roofs in any directions to create that solar collectors. I also didn't note on this, but the idea is that we could create this as a modular type construction where you could split this thing in half and have 2 units where it's 13 by 35 to be shipped to the site and then combined together. We're looking into that possibility. We've done about 3 of these projects so far. This one right here, if you look at the next slide. Next slide, please. This is a unit that's actually built on my property that we did this for my 97-year-old mother-in-law, and she's living in it right now, very happy and very mobile and very happy with it. We used fiber-on material on the outside, which is a simulated wood. It has a long life on it, and it's a little costly up front, but low maintenance in the future. We carried the metal slope roof down the backside and just to create the character, kind of a very contemporary thing. Large doors on the side face the west to bring in some of the solar sun on the winter. And then we have large blinds on the outside to cover them up in the summer to prevent the sun. Next slide, please. The interior we kept kind of tall and open. It is narrow and long, but it works very well. We use some wood structure on the ceiling or wood finish on the ceiling, give it the warm character. You can see there the sliding door for covering up the washer dryer. And if you're really focused, you can see through the window of a biffy for the project next door. And I wanted to show that down below on the lower right is the exact same floor plan, but it's reversed, but it uses all the different materials that you can use for a different site. That house on that site has all clay tile and stucco, so you can actually use the same kind of concept and still make it work. Next slide, please. I'm bringing up a whole new concept here or issue that we're having. We work a lot of projects on the downtown Encinitas area, and the hatched area shown here is what the Coastal Commission has created for us as being very difficult in the downtown area. According to the new rules of regulation of the Coastal Commission, any building or ADU that displaces any parking within this area must be mitigated on site, or we must create enough parking to compensate for that. This is against the rules and regulations of the actual code that is presented by law, that if you actually displace that parking, you don't have to replace it if you're within a certain distance of a bus station, train station, or otherwise. And we've been submitted a project that's downtown, and right now it's been denied because we can't do the parking that we need to do that. Everything west or east of this coast highway has no restrictions, and we can do whatever we want on those kind of issues, as long as it's close to an issue there. Next slide, please. This is the project. It's a mixed use, and we have the allocation of the garage below that we could convert to an ADU, and it's approximately 450 square feet. It would be a one bedroom. And we are been denied that because we can't get the parking on the site to compensate for it. So my question is, does the Coastal Commission actually have the legal and rights to overlap and control our legislated laws? And I would like to pursue this a little further and see what we can do about it, because it affects a lot of the coastal projects along the cities and stuff along the coast. And basically, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ted Tiffany. I'm with Goodman & Blavwick Consulting Engineers, and this is my family home. It's about a 980 square foot classic craftsman home that I'm building a granny unit for student housing. I live right across the Santa Rosa Junior College, and I have 2 kids that are going to be going through the junior college. So this is going to be their college housing. And I started this out as a custom build. I wanted to build it myself, design it myself with an architect buddy of mine. And we did that. We got the full design done and got a couple of contractors to bid it out. And I live in Santa Rosa, which we've had 3 years of fires that destroyed about 9,000 homes. And the construction climate is really crazy right now. Contractors aren't available. Materials are crazy. We had one contractor buy out a concrete plant that drove up concrete about 40% just in our county alone. So this small little 450 square foot granny unit was going to be about $220,000 to build without me building on the top. Next slide. So I need to come up with some solutions. And I was working with this really great group called Homes for Sonoma that were building modular ADUs for fire rebuild area, just bring housing to the county. Quattrocki Quawks, Axia Architects, Eighth Wave Construction put together this package. And at the time, I wasn't considering to do any factory built housing. I wanted to do it custom, but this opportunity came through to get a modular construction home that was factory built. We won't call it modular. It's all one unit, but in right about $175,000 is going to be our final cost. And the site costs are really expensive right now. The actual unit with delivery is only about $100,000. And this is factory built up in Washington State. So go ahead to the next slide. So this was a really difficult decision for me because I live in a historic district and I wanted to make sure that this unit was going to fit in with the historic district issues. As you can see, mine's a real beautiful craftsman home and didn't really want to ruin the look of the nature. So we actually were allowed to build a 1,200 square foot house, granny unit that was bigger than the original house, and that would have been front facing, but then I would have had to deal with a lot of the historical issues. So this brought the granny unit back and to the left of the property. So it's off the property line. You won't really be able to see this too much from the fence line. So next slide. As Charles noted, we had some space issues in this. This is a very small, compact unit. This is about 430 square feet of conditioned space, about 480 square foot overall with the decks. The water heaters were an issue, right? Charles noted that the heat pump water heaters, which were in Santa Rosa, which has an all-electric reach code, which I helped develop for them, we had to put in a heat pump water heater to meet compliance. And that sound issue I was very well aware of, Charles. So We went with a split stand-in unit in this one. So it'll just have the tank alone. The condenser will be outside on the wall mount, but it's really overkill. It's a very expensive unit. And the BTUs on it is way overkill for this small shower, bath, kitchen arrangement. So I was looking at the Nile units, which are about half the size of the stand-in units, would do this same project. So I might actually do a pilot with them and switch out that stand-in unit using the same tanks. So next slide. But that gets that noise issue out of it. So here's a look at the unit. This is sitting up on the manufacturer's lot in Washington. And it's going to be trucked down and placed on the lot in a couple of months after we get the site permit finished off. But go to the next slide. Pretty unit, gorgeous interiors. It's going to all come pre-finished, floors, everything, the cabinets, appliances already in it, delivered. So this is really kind of turnkey solution. They're going to roll it onto the lot, put it on the permanent foundation, and it'll be plugged in from the utilities that we have on site. So go ahead. Next slide. So that's the unit in construction, and that's Homes for Sonoma. If you want to learn more about that. One more slide, I want to talk about some of the issues. And really the challenges for our rebuild area is just the costs. So this was a cost solution and a speed of construction issue. I'm going to do an embodied carbon analysis on the transportation versus the build and all the materials in Washington State. But right now for our issues, local fire recode permitting is a challenge. And I wanted to give you some last resources. I know we're on time. Click to the next slide. One of the bigger issues that we had was PV on this ADU. It is required by the Energy Code in 2019. And I couldn't get any vendors to give us a 1.1 kW system that was required for this building. So we actually did what Charles did on his ADU, is we put a 4.8 kW system to cover both the existing house and the ADU loads. Energy Code ACE, who we do a lot of Energy Code education through the state, and this is supported by the California Energy Commission and the ratepayers from the IOUs. We have these Energy Code fact sheets for the accessory dwelling units. And we do have these 30 to 90 minute live seminars on request that we can deliver, basically just diving down on the Energy Code issues for the Energy Code. 2022 will make some significant changes for ADUs to look out for. So those fact sheets will be coming out for 2022 shortly. So Michael, I'll pass it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted, and thanks to all the presenters. Really beautiful work, very inspirational. And obviously it's not all roses because there are some challenges. And that's now we get into the second part of the program, which is more in-depth conversation about some of these challenges and opinions about what they mean and how they fit into the state landscape. Now, to seed this, we're going to first just kind of run through these broad high-level topics. Prior to doing this webinar, we did a sort of a trial run, and we identified some of the issues, and I thought it would be helpful. And in fact, with over 450 people on this webinar, I'm not sure how many questions we'll get, although there's quite a few unanswered questions in the chat, but many of them will be covered as we go through this. So what I'd like to do right now is invite our entire panel, and as well as the presenters, if Rebecca has a way to sort of bring everybody on. And we're going to start with the zoning questions. I know some of the ones that we've heard about are regards to setback. State law talks about side yard, but it doesn't say anything about street side yard. And in many jurisdictions, the street side yard setback is considered sort of like a front setback and is regulated differently than interior side yard setbacks. There's also issues with setbacks that aren't in the local zoning code, but are on things like subdivision map or maybe in the CCRs. And I also thought Greg might touch on SB 9, and I see that that's come up in the chat as well. So Greg, could you give us kind of a high-level overview of some of these issues from HCD's perspective?
Well, that's quite a subject. setbacks. First of all, state law, and it says, it has for some time, said that local jurisdictions may not require side and rear lot line setbacks to be greater than 4 feet. There's nothing for, actually, the law also allows a local jurisdiction with an adopted ADU ordinance to establish a setback for the front. So I'm going to back up a little bit with that because you mentioned easements and recorded setbacks and such. So let's address that. The zoning, the ADU law is basically a zoning document. If there is it allows side and rear setbacks to be no more than, to be as little as 4 feet. Now, as an example, if there's a 5-foot public utility easement along one of those two property lines, the side or rear, then that prevails. So no easement, no other restrictions, nothing on a recorded map, a recorded setback, a public utility easement, or another kind of an easement. Again, 4 feet may be allowed. On the front, a local jurisdiction is set with an adopted ordinance may establish the fronts. There is another provision in ADU law that says every lot in the zone that allows single family and multifamily is allowed to build at least an 800 square foot ADU. Now, it might be in the front yard, it might be on the second story. As a second story, it might be somewhere else in the lot. So at least an 800 square foot ADU. There's also another section, and we call it the state exemption section of ADU statute, that says an ADU of not more than 800 square feet, unless allowed by the local agency, may be built on the lot, and it does not need to comply with local development standards that may be contained within an adopted ADU ordinance. So easements, we rarely get a question about that, and we get about 100 questions a week. It rarely addresses the front yard. It really comes down to at least an 800 square foot ADU must be allowed. Mike, what were some of the other items that you wanted on the setback? Let me get back to, first of all, zoning. Any lot, any area that's zoned to accommodate a single family or multifamily is mandated by state law to allow an ADU. Local jurisdictions may designate areas that where ADUs are permitted. The only restriction there is adequacy of sewer, water, and the impact that the ADU has on traffic flow and public safety. Probably almost nothing. And for jurisdictions to hold out an area to not allow ADUs, HCD would be looking for findings, analysis and findings on why areas are not allowed to be in any area based on those 4 criteria. Used to say, including but not limited to these 4. Well, the legislature said housing is so important. We're not offering any other options to not allow an ADU. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say that's really helpful, Greg. I think one of the areas that I know that I've posed to you personally in regards to projects is the street side yard setback.
Yeah.
The city, many jurisdictions have a setback similar to a front yard setback, although maybe it's 12.5 feet instead of 20 feet or something like that. And I know you have told me in emails that in fact, state law 4 foot would apply to a street side setback because there is no separate category for a street setback. Maybe you could talk about what is an architect, what kinds of things can an architect do? And I see this coming up in the chat, just about what kinds of things can an architect do faced with an interpretation that may differ from HCD's interpretation of what the state law means in their local community.
As we review the adopted ADU ordinances that are submitted to HCD, and they do have a side street setback that is greater than 4 feet, we write them a letter, typically with many other findings of non-compliance issues. HCD has made the determination that it is a side and rear lot line, and a side street is a side lot line. So the setback from the lot line is allowed to be as little as 4 feet along that property line. Again, the front, there's no limitation. We sometimes do get into an ordinance that says the ADU must be rearward of the rear wall, exterior wall of the primary dwelling. We've even made making notes about that because that can be very limiting, especially in a case with relatively shallow lots. You know, let's just say as an example, the backyard is only 15 feet deep. Or you take away your 4 foot for your your lot line setback, and most jurisdictions, I think I can safely say most jurisdictions have also a separation requirement between the detached ADU and the primary dwelling. A lot of them go 6 or 10 feet. Doesn't leave much room for an ADU in the backyard. So we are questioning those as being excessive and burdensome, as noted in ADU statute, that those requirements cannot be required. I mean, there are even some others that the ordinance says the ADU cannot be visible from a public right-of-way. Extremely excessive, and we note that to the jurisdiction of the findings, rather, and ask for a revision to an ordinance like this.
So what mechanism might an architect use to get an opinion from HCD that they might put in front of their local jurisdiction? Is it?
We do that day in and day out, an email. Yeah, we can hear the case on the telephone, but we just can't take it from there. An email, preferably with correspondence, written correspondence from the jurisdiction, plan check comments, or if it's a guide, a handout. Of course, handouts, guidelines are of virtually no value without an adopted ADU ordinance, because without an adopted ADU ordinance, the local agencies are limited to using state standards. So to answer your question, Mike, an email with as much documentation as possible. And we do that, said, a lot. We'll contact that person from that's noted on the local agency correspondence and contact them by way of email or a telephone call, and then proceed from there if we have to. It's a real pleasure to hear back from an applicant to say, yeah, after HCD contacted the local agency, they understood better, and I now have my permit. It's just a great thing to hear. Sometimes it takes a letter, and sometimes they don't accept findings, and then we just have to move on to the next step.
That's great, Greg. In fact, I've had that personal experience in my own county, where their original ADU law I felt was not in compliance with state law. And I had you take a look, and you, as I recall, shot me an email, and I forwarded it on, and it ended up in the county attorney's office. And in the end, they did rewrite their ordinance. So that does happen, but as you mentioned, it does take time.
Yeah.
Could you, I know on our earlier pre-webinar work session, you did mention some notes about SB 9, and I know we're not really talking about SB 9, but if you could just replay some of the comments that you
okay,
that would be helpful.
And then we might as well touch on the CCRs also. But with SB 9, HCD is really not tasked by the legislature to want to be the department or agency to step forward in that, but since it's housing, we have the memo or the technical assistance document is not finalized yet, but we will be putting a short section of the analysis in the ADU handbook that is nearing full approval so that we can update that. The current one is dated December 2020. We've really only had, well, we have had one bit of legislation approved, effective the 1st of 2021, AB 3182, which allows an ADU and a JADU on a site with a single family dwelling. But SB 9, it comes down to that it doesn't not allow ADUs and JADUs. What it does do is it limits the number of dwelling units, or units, I should say, to a lot that has gone through the lot split process allowed by SB 9. The lot split with a single family home on it, with single family zoning. Well, I shouldn't say single family. It could have a duplex on it, but it limits the number of units to 2 per lot. it also goes on to define what a unit is, and that is a primary dwelling, an ADU, and the JADU. So brings to the question to me, what happens if someone has a single family home and they have created an ADU and a JADU, and both of them are even within the walls of the single family residence? They're at 3. They might not be able to go through a lot split as allowed by SB 9. If they had a detached ADU, well, they might put that new lot line between the detached ADU and the single family home that also contains a junior accessory dwelling unit. But anyway, bottom line, and the answers that people have, including some jurisdictions, is we've heard that you can go 2 units, 4 units, 6 units, even 8 units. I don't know where they're getting that, but everything that HCD is looking at, it's limited to 2 units per lot with the allowance of that lot split by SB 9, those 2 sections of government code.
That's great. I see.
Greg, may I ask a question?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned about ADUs and being allowed wherever single family is allowed.
Yes.
Is that a similar interpretation as the zoned for single family verbiage in the SB 9 bill?
Yeah, you're probably getting into an area that is a little gray, but let me clarify.
Well, yes, that's hence the question. Let me get into the first part. Greg. Is
it ADUs are allowed in areas zoned to allow single family and multifamily. Yeah, it doesn't matter if the lot is zoned multifamily and it has a single family home on it. It's still zoned to allow single family and multifamily. ADU law also allows an ADU to be created where a single family or multifamily is existing or even proposed. There's a little bit of confusion there. I don't know how many of you are involved with multifamily, but there's the exemption section that may allow multiple ADUs on a site with an existing multifamily dwelling structure. If you don't comply to all of the constraints of that exemption section, then you're still allowed at least 1 ADU on a site with a proposed or existing single family or multifamily. But you'd be needing to comply with any local development standards that have been created with an adopted ADU ordinance for that jurisdiction. So with SB 9, you can do, this was your question, if you had, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, being able to have an ADU where single family is allowed,
yes,
versus SB 9 saying zoned single family, like in a multifamily zone that has an allowable use of single family, does that qualify for SB 9?
No, for SB 9, no, because SB 9, and you see, I'm sort of like getting into that gray area, but SB 9 says single family, I think it says single family zone. So you're not going to be able to, I mean, the jurisdiction is probably not going to allow you to do, a lot split as allowed by SB 9 if you are not in a single family zone. And also there's some other issues too, in sort of like an urban environment or population or density per the census numbers. But I think it says single family zone. Just take a look at those 2 sections of government code that are revised or added with SB 9.
Okay, thanks.
You know, the difference is though, is we get a single family lot with a single family home, you can create an ADU and a JADU. You've got 3. If you want to go through the lot split process, you could do 2 per lot. So there's 4. If you had a site with a duplex on it, whether it was zoned or not, if you have a duplex on it, that per ADU law is a multifamily. And you could create not more than 2 detached ADUs on that lot with a 2 attached units, a duplex.
Yeah, the duplex is a great example because right now the way it's written is that you would have to go through entitlements and public hearings and a lot of objective standards, maybe not objective standards, but lots of fees and everything to create a duplex on a duplex lot. Whereas SB 9 makes it really easy to create a duplex on a single family lot.
That's right.
So like really easy on single family lots, hard on duplex lots when it should be by right. and easy on a
Right.
duplex lot, and there's confusion there. So,
and if you have a single family in the lot and you wanted to even attach an ADU to it, it has all the same requirements that are required for a dwelling unit. Is defined, a dwelling unit is defined in the building code, and for all intents and purposes, an ADU attached to a single family home can look like to most people, many people, a duplex. It's two units with provisions for cooking and sanitation and eating and sleeping and living. Yes, and you have those items that you don't need to comply with. No fees, reduced fees. There's a lot of benefits. Can be either way. I'm waiting to see some examples of economical reasons to go the SB9 route, but we'll see down the line.
Let's touch on for just a minute CCRs and homeowners associations.
Yep. A little over 2 years ago, a lot of people were surprised that the state law, basically, the state stepped in and says state law will prevail over CCRs, and it says ADUs and JADUs shall not be prohibited from a common interest development. And there's an important thing. It is not just CCRs in a gated community. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not CCRs in a project, a subdivision with houses. It needs to be a common interest development. What is that? It's defined in the civil code, 4700, I think. So you have some, there's a pool house, there's maybe a gate, there's some property that is individual, undivided. Everyone has an undivided interest in common interest development. It's defined in the civil code. And so the law says, and it's nice that they define this too, that anything that in the CCRs that either effectively prohibits or unreasonably restricts the construction of an ADU or a JADU shall be void and unenforceable. And then it goes on to say, reasonable restrictions means restrictions that do not unreasonably increase the cost to construct. So if they wanted to call that siding material because that's in their CCRs, or window glazing patterns, or whatever they might do, as long as it doesn't reasonably increase the cost to construct, an ADU or JADU has to be allowed in a common interest development that would otherwise have restrictions in their CCRs.
Very helpful. The next main topic area was on utilities, and we didn't really have anything specific, but if there are some of the panelists or presenters that want to offer general comments on utility issues, connecting water, power. I know that we've seen instances where electric capacity has been a serious constraint. In fact, it's killed projects we've seen because of the cost of upgrading a service, especially when it's an underground service. In PG&E territory, for example, you can get into $10,000, $20,000 expenses just to deal with that.
I was looking at Ted's plan a little bit when he had it up, and it had a detached, a new detached ADU. Yeah. The state law says, and it says it says the local agency, special district, or water corporation may require a new service to an ADU that's not created within the space of an existing structure.
Yeah, Greg, the electric service upgrade was required. I'm just about to finish that 200 amp upgrade. The existing service was only 100 amp and was added to this house. This house was built in 1915. Is inadequate for our electrification addition. I actually have to do a full sewer upgrade and water, so we're negotiating those fees right now. But Santa Rosa has waived a lot of the fees, including the school impact fees for anything under 500 square feet. So I don't have an answer on the water yet. We're still navigating that.
I saw your plan. It looks like you're tying the water into the house. If they allow that, wonderful. But
yes, they do.
Could say go out to wherever the water service, the lateral or the main is, and build a new service. They can do that.
Yeah, they have not asked us to add any new electrical or water services, and they haven't had any plan check comments on connecting to existing sewer line, and we're actually improving that existing sewer line.
You know, another thing is that the ADU law says ADU shall comply with local building code for detached dwellings. And so if you added enough, if the existing house on the property was maxed out on, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, was maxed out on the size of the water service, for instance, it's probably the most one, the size of the water service, that compliance with building code could, and we get these questions once in a while, could require an upsizing of that service. You know, 5/8 inch, for instance, 3/4 inch. And you put a big enough demand on the ADU, you know, especially if maybe these two things don't go together. If the primary dwelling is required to have sprinklers, the ADU then would be required to have sprinklers, and the demand for the kitchen fixtures, the bathroom fixtures, and then the fire sprinklers could overwhelm, go beyond what's allowed to be served with a smaller water service. And that's a building code item, and that water service you wouldn't need to build a new one, but you may be required to update the existing.
Yeah, the new ADU is Cal Green compliant already, and the entire residence is being retrofitted for water supply, Cal Green fixtures as well while we're at it, and electrifying the entire house. So this project will go complete electric for the entire site when we're done.
I will say one thing, since I sort of stepped into this, and this is something that is being discussed, and since January 1, 2020, when ADUs were allowed to be built with a multifamily, we've taken a little bit closer look at, we've received a lot of questions on that item, shall comply with local building requirements that apply to detached dwellings. So the position is that the law says, the law prevails, for instance, over building code for fire sprinklers. The law says that the codes to be used are for ADUs, are for detached dwellings. It changed a couple of words way back in, maybe prior to 2003, but the law says that the codes to be used for those who are doing maybe an ADU added on to a duplex or more, that the codes for that ADU shouldn't be required to be more than what's required in the code for detached dwellings. And we're working on it.
So, Mike, I just wanted to add into that a little bit, not on that specific thing, but as far as the drainage for the ADUs, someone in the chat had said something about tying into the existing home. So there's actually a section in the California Plumbing Code that says every building shall have an independent connection with a public or private sewer. We did last in reading code cycle put a note into that says accessory dwelling units are not required to have independent service utility drainage connections, provided they meet specific requirements of Government Code Section 6585 2.2. So I know there were some jurisdictions that were requiring a separate connection straight to the sewer, meaning digging up the street and all of that. So this is a change to the code that we made to make that not be required if they were adhering strictly to the letter of the plumbing code.
Thanks, Tom. That's helpful. While you've got the floor, could you talk about occupancy changes, the CRC versus the CBC, fire separations? I know we've had some conversations pre-webinar about those issues, and just take a stab at that high-level topic.
Yeah, I can tell you the company line that I was told yesterday, and that is the revision of codes is stepping back. Anything to do with ADUs will be coming strictly from housing policy. So there will be one answer coming out of HCD, not a possibility of two different answers. So I think that's good that we have a consistent answer coming out of HCD. Personally, I'm not real thrilled about us not chiming in on some of the more code-related issues that are strictly code, not just ADU. Part of the problem is a program that I work for is called the State Housing Law Program. So people think we should know everything there is to know about anything to do with a house anywhere in California. That's not true. We deal strictly with the building codes. Housing policy deals with anything ADU and what local jurisdictions allow and don't allow. And I know they have a good working relationship with a lot of these jurisdictions. And they usually seem to be the planning department rather than the building department, which is who I would have relationships with. So my very clear direction just at a staff meeting yesterday was we will defer back to housing policy.
Just to let everyone know, the housing policy, here where I am, and codes and standards where Tom is, communicate back and forth a lot, just giving clarification so we can better answer an ADU or JADU question. A lot of other things that just gets in a little bit deep. We're not code people here. We will refer people to Tom's division for code related items. Back to sort of what I was saying about the occupancy thing. It says the code used for the JADU that's attached to a duplex, which creates 3 or more units, which some people think needs to go to be an R2. The ADU should be allowed to be using the code for the detached dwellings. It's an accessory unit to the primary dwelling on the property. And without the primary unit, it doesn't exist. It's not like a brand new apartment unit in a way. It doesn't make a duplex into a triplex, even though it has all the facilities to give everything, provisions for cooking, eating, sleeping, living, and sanitation. Mechanical systems, that's more like a building code thing, and that's something that we would, on an ADU, that's where we would defer to codes and standards on. On a JADU, it does not have to have firewall, separate mechanical, plumbing, electric. It is conversion of an existing space in a proposed existing single-family dwelling. The law, when it went into effect in 2017 and through 2019, required that the JADU be created from an existing bedroom. It gives you an idea, and it had to have a doorway between the JADU and the space, interior space of the primary dwelling. For some reason, those two things went away, but it's still part of the existing single-family dwelling, and no separate services are required. And as we all know, we can share a bathroom. So nothing separate for there. So the energy code, we rarely answer some questions on that. Even in our handbook, we have a reference to the Energy Commission for those specifics. We have posted a couple of their newsletters, CEC's newsletters at our ADU webpage to provide a little bit more information. Hate to be answered and be wrong on that one. It was mentioned earlier by I think it might have been Charles or Adam about the Coastal Commission. And this has been in the ADU law for a few years now, and I'll just read it. A local agency, city or county, shall not issue, nothing in this section shall be construed to supersede or in any way alter or lessen the effect of the California Coastal Act. Meaning, yes, we still have the ADU law, but if it's exempt for to not have to require parking or off-street parking, and the Coastal Commission, through the review of the ADU application, says it needs to have on-site parking. That's above and beyond ADU law, as allowed by ADU law. So we're looking at the ADU law, and if the Coastal Commission is looking at doing something else, maybe restricting height or lot coverage or parking, that's something else they can make comments on and require of the ADU application. We are also continuing to work with the Coastal Commission to see how some things that might be backed off on a little bit, such as like when an ADU is created within the space of an existing structure, especially when that might be the living area of an existing structure. What additional impact is there? Is there a requirement for parking? No one can dictate how many cars are served a lot or how how many people live on a lot. So it's being worked on, still being worked on.
Well, Greg, you mentioned the ADU handbook and the potential update that's coming. Maybe expand on that a little bit, where people can get it.
Oh, sure. Sure. It is at the HCD EDU webpage. I tell a lot of people, I said, how do people find it? The best thing I said, I finally figured out, go to Google search, type in California ADU law, probably the link at the top of the list, you'll have HCD in it. Click on that and it will take you directly to the HCD EDU webpage. And at that site, you can click and download and copy the handbook. We send those out. We've sent them out to probably, well, every jurisdiction, planning director, et cetera. And we say, hand these out as freely as you would like, but it is available at the EDU webpage. Let me see if I have. Yeah, probably that's the best thing I can do right now without verbalizing the address of it.
No, that's
we're updating, by the way, Mike, we're updating it, and not necessarily because of changes to law, even though we did have the one little one. We said we're an ADU and a ADU, both are allowed on a lot with a single family. The ADUs are not allowed with multifamily. And otherwise, we're updating it just to add a lot more FAQs that we've received over the last couple of years, mostly related to multifamily, ADUs with multifamily. The new one should be coming out, I keep my fingers crossed, December of last year. But we're looking at probably in the next month or so.
another vehicle that people can use is if you are interested in being part of the network that AI California set up, design professionals that work with ADUs. We have over 100 participating design professionals. There are robust conversations that go on our Basecamp site on a daily basis. Rebecca will put a link in the question and answer or chat so that you can ask her to put you on in that platform, because that's a great way to exchange information with other design professionals. One of the areas that I see a lot of questions that have popped up on are solar systems for detached ADUs, since it's a requirement of state law, except in those few places, like I happen to live in Sacramento County, served by SMUD, and we have a community solar program that makes that issue relatively easy to address. But small solar systems, as would be mandated for a detached ADU, are obviously problematic. I'm not sure if Javier is still on from the Energy Commission. I don't see him in the window, but if we could have some conversation about the solar.
Yeah, I am here. I'm on my phone right now, so hopefully you can hear me okay, and hopefully I'm coming in reasonably clearly. Power's kind of been going in and out here, so apologize for that. With regards to the 2019 Energy Code, the PV requirements are strictly applicable to newly constructed single or newly constructed low-rise residential buildings, which means essentially built from the ground up and detached. You know, there's one of the most common questions we get is conversions of structures, buildings that are attached to a primary building, buildings on top of an existing structure. Again, the cleanest way that I can describe this is a building is built from the ground up, newly constructed and detached, not sharing a common wall or common floor with an existing structure, then it's a newly constructed building. And David Donahue says, let's hear the exception. So yeah, sure, David, let's have that discussion. Current exceptions exist for shading for situations where you have less than 80 contiguous square feet. So that's one way to get out of it. And again, we're strictly talking 2019 Energy Code and compliance. You know, I'm looking into how we've clarified this and how that 80 contiguous square foot exception can apply to accessory dwelling units that have less than 80 square feet of roof. You know, if you don't have 80 square feet of roof, this is Javier speaking, you know, the position may probably be best to say that you don't have the roof area, the requirements shouldn't exist, right? And keep in mind, you still need to have a perimeter for fire code access. So that limits your roof area even more. So keep that in mind. I'll follow up with the AIA team and make sure that I can get a clarification on that. Don't want you to walk away with Javier said it, but we do have the Blueprint newsletter that's happy to see you're happy, David. We do have the Blueprint newsletter that we publish quarterly, and I've already reached out to the team that develops that publication to see if we can clarify that moving forward. Now, if you want to look into the future a little bit, the 2022 Energy Code has reworked that exception to have it only apply when you don't have solar access area. And then we went on to define what solar access, or sorry, I can't remember what the acronym stands for right now in 2022, but I'll get that clarification to you guys soon. As far as the 2022 Energy Code is concerned, I think one of the most front and center exceptions for this requirement is just a blanket exception that says if the Energy Code requires less than 1.8 kW of PV, then the requirement doesn't apply. So for Ted's situation in his background where 1.1 was the trigger, we certainly got plenty of feedback from industry stakeholders that said this is a real challenge to get to a contractor to come out, and the costs that are baked in are making these situations a little bit challenging. So moving forward, 1.8 is the threshold. That should be fairly reasonable. And this is just me talking, but 1.8, essentially, the more efficient you make your building, the lower you can get your cooling loads, because that's one of the biggest drivers for these things. The more likely you'll be under that capacity. But when you get to smaller ADUs, you shouldn't have a problem unless you're designing 2x4 or 13 construction, which I think anybody will tell you you gotta beef that up a little bit. And continuing on with exceptions in 2022, I understand that there are concerns, and I think might have been Michael, might have been somebody else spoke to having a heat pump water heater and space constraints, noise issues, challenges with smaller structures. Exception was introduced in the 2022 Energy Code, and keep in mind, 2022 is applicable based on date of application, and more specifically, based on if you apply for a permit on or after January 1 of 2023. So save your permit application dates for that, and you can take advantage of some of these. And the point of that is to say, the water heating limitations in 2022 with regards to electric water heaters, if a dwelling unit, and we're talking about ADUs, but I think it's appropriate to call it just a dwelling unit when it's a newly constructed detached building from an energy code perspective. If it's less than 500 square feet, then there's no heat pump water heating requirement. We certainly would encourage it. There are technologies and methods to satisfy this requirement that I think are reasonable, but the point is less than or equal to 500 square feet. Electric instantaneous water heating systems are allowed. And I'm like struggling to say that out loud, but that is the position. So that's where we are. And Tim, you've had your hand up for a little while. I do want to allow you to speak there. Go ahead.
No, Javier, I had just a follow-up, and it was one thing I had to navigate with the Homes for Sonoma. We're seeing a proliferation of modular factory-built ADUs specifically, and we built this to be Title 24 compliant, but I've had a lot of questions come up, and one came up in the chat of when Title 24 Part 6 applies to the manufacturer or factory-built house.
And those are the two terms that I would recommend sticking to. I know mobile homes is thrown out there. I know modular is thrown out there, manufactured and factory built. Those are the two terms that I want you guys to use. And HCD can speak to this probably better than I can, but the short answer is if it is a factory built home, satisfies the definition of what a factory built home is, then it's subject to Title 24 as well as Title 25 measures. If it is a manufactured home, not subject to Title 24, including the Energy Code. That falls under Title 25 outside of the Energy Code's jurisdiction. Those significant changes happen in those scenarios. So if you're going factory built, Energy Code is required.
I see Tom got your hand up too, Tom.
Yeah, first I would say I agree with everything Javier just said on that. Factory built, Title 24. And I just want to go back to a question I saw in the chat, because I know Greg Nicholas and I have discussed this quite a bit. The question says, some jurisdictions are requiring fixed stoves in new construction JADUs. can the jurisdiction then require a fire rated separation if it has a fixed stove installed? Well, my thought on that is it can't even require the fixed stove. I mean, a single family home is not required to have a stove. It's required to have 2 small appliance branch circuits in the kitchen, which I believe is considered permanent provisions for cooking. And I know Greg and I have discussed this in the past, and I'm thinking we're on the same page on that one, Greg.
Absolutely, Tom. It does say provisions for cooking, and as Tom said, the appliances are not a requirement in building code. So it means storage, countertop, a sink, 2 branch circuits for the building code part of it, as ADUs must comply with building code, and no appliances can be required. I mean, we've written many letters to jurisdictions after reviewing their ADU ordinance and let them know that. The JADU statute words a little bit differently, that it shall have appliances. So we point that out to jurisdictions that an appliance doesn't mean that it needs to sit on the floor. An appliance may be a countertop appliance, including a microwave, a griddle, whatever else. Appliances for JADU, provisions for cooking in an ADU.
I wanted to also make a comment to piggyback on what Javier said about changes upcoming in the energy. Not all architects or design professionals are aware that even if a code is not yet in place, the fact that it's been adopted for a future code cycle, and many jurisdictions would allow that to be the basis for a request for an alternate means, so that if there is in fact a provision that cites this 1.8 threshold that will go into effect in January 1st, 2023, local jurisdictions may be willing to consider that as a basis for granting. Is that consistent with your interpretation, Javier, that alternate means requests can also apply to the energy code?
You know, I try to stay out of, those lines that are drawn. What I would say is typically when we get this type of question of, look, the next code cycle is going in one direction. Can we move in that direction for that requirement? Typically our position is the code has to be met as a whole. You can't really pick and choose which measures, one can select to comply with, but, to your point, this is a jurisdiction call. So I don't want to speak for jurisdictions here. And there will be jurisdictions that are early adopters. Every code cycle, we have early adopters that adopt the entire code, a few months prior to its effective date. So that's not, that wouldn't be a first for sure.
I would like to add to that too, that I know a lot of the building officials that I have relationships with, when it comes to alternate methods and means of construction, if they have something like a future code that is already approved but not yet effective, as long as they have something to hang their hat on and say, okay, this is reasonable. Most of the ones that I've talked to are willing to do that. Obviously not, I'm not speaking for all of them or any of them, but most of the ones that I've talked to in the past, as long as there's something that they can reference that it is coming up, they'll usually allow it.
Now that you're talking about codes, Tom, I think it might be a good segue to the topic that we had actually quite a lively discussion on as a group when in our pre-webinar session about occupancy change when you get to 3 units, and some jurisdictions are saying now you're into multifamily territory, you can no longer use the California residential code, you have to use the California building code. One of the challenges in California is that each code official is free to interpret the code individually, even if there is a state level requirement. In the end, the day-to-day interpretation of the code. And you mentioned CalBO as an entity that represents building official interest across the state. And sometimes they get involved in these kinds of questions, not that they can mandate a local official, but I think that there's maybe a lack of clarity on the part of some design professionals about how much latitude a local code official has in interpreting the code. So maybe you could comment on that, Tom.
Well, yeah, I will say that HCD, Division of Codes and Standards, does have oversight over local building departments. Now, with that said, we technically have oversight if they are grossly over-enforcing or under-enforcing the code. But when there are gray areas in the code, which we all know there's 1 or 2 of those, it is up to the local building official to interpret that code. Now, in the 10 years that I've been with the state housing law program, we have never, ever stepped in to a local building department and said, we're taking over because you're grossly over enforcing or under enforcing the code. So there is a lot of latitude given to the local building official.
And if it's okay, this is Javier, I'd like to speak to that a little bit, Michael. You know, I did reach out to Calvo as kind of a larger chapter in California over the different enforcement agencies, and they said that they while they did provide clarification for legislation with regards to code interpretations, that's not something that they get into. Short answer was no there, but what I would say, and I think this is very important here, depending on where you are, you have a local ICC chapter. LA Basin is one of the largest ones. Every month I go virtually now, but I go to the Shasta Cascade ICC chapter meeting. And every month in the first hour of that meeting, which is 2.5 hours and enough jurisdictions come in that it's worth it, they have something that they call a code consistency session. And they talk about how there might be conflicts. And, you know, like you were saying, you have scenarios where you go to a jurisdiction, they say the answer is X, you go to another one, the answer is Y. And the reality is sometimes there may not always be consensus, but they certainly do make an effort to get on the same page. So, you know, I would like to try to connect you to those ICC chapters. They're always welcoming, and they're my experience, they want to get it right. So strongly encourage reaching out to the local ICC chapters.
Well, and another thing I want to say along with that is when I've dealt with other issues in the past, mostly access, I had long conversations with jurisdictions, and if there were 5 jurisdictions adjacent to each other and 4 of them were interpreting one thing one way and the 5th was interpreting it different, I strongly suggested that they get together, have a cup of coffee, and have a discussion. And usually the 4 could convince the one, but I have known of situations where the one convinced the other 4 to see it his way. But at least that way you're getting some consistency throughout that local area. I mean, it's never going to be consistent throughout the whole state. It's just too varied. But at least you're getting, you know, if you're working in the Bay Area, you're getting a consistent answer in the Bay Area.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I see Warren has your hand up. Go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, I just had a couple issues, and when I've been working, we have one case where we have a multifamily unit. We wanted to add ADUs, and as the city's come back and said we have to make them accessible. And I'm seeing that as being a difficult thing in some cases. And also, you just brought up the fact that they might be changing the occupancy from an R to, to an R1 or R3 or whatever to an R2, and suddenly now you're multifamily, and then you fall into the accessibility code. What is the determination on this kind of issues?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. I'm not involved in access as much as I used to be, but so depending on, so your buildings in California need to be maintained to the codes that were in effect when the building was built. So if there were access requirements at the time, you would have to comply with those. But I don't, personally, I don't think when you're adding an ADU to a single family home or a duplex, you're not changing it to a multifamily dwelling by definition, okay. Which is when access would apply.
All right. Now, if you have a brand new multifamily or mixed use project that has residential on the first floor, according to the code, all first floor units must be accessible. So if a new ADU is on the first floor, we must make it accessible.
Correct.
Okay.
We're getting near the end of our time slot. We do have a few more minutes, but Rebecca, can you put up the final slide? And I'm just going to kind of open it up for parting thoughts by members of the panel. Before everyone leaves this, they will have an opportunity to respond to a questionnaire. If you like this webinar and you feel there's a need for more webinars like this, please let us know, and we're happy to try and put those together. Looking forward, we're trying to get into the weeds and really solve some technical issues, but we also try and operate at a high level and not get too bogged down. So we tried to find that sweet spot. But I'll open it up now. If there's anyone on the panel or presenters that want to offer any parting thoughts, And those of you who have joined us, we appreciate your having taken the time, and feel free to let us know if you would like more. And don't forget that you have an opportunity to join our technical network. That's where design professionals trade tips, insights, thoughts, observations, code references, all kinds of great information is flying back and forth on there increasingly, particularly in recent days. And some of these conundrums, you'll find what other people did to solve them. So anyone else have any parting thoughts here?
Yeah, so this is Javier, again, with the Energy Commission. One thing that I would like to request of anybody who wants to be a part of this is, while the 2022 Energy Code is not effective until 12 months from now, we're already starting on the 2025 code. And I hate to say it, but that's just how long it takes to get this process done right. And the point of me to bring that up is to say, if you have ideas, if you have concerns, if you have energy efficient, or even scenarios where you think the energy code should address something differently, like one of the ideas was the attic insulation requirements, addressing smaller buildings in a different manner. Title24stakeholders.com is a website that's produced or that's overseen by the Codes and Standards Enhancement Team. They're accepting proposals through March 15th. So you got about a month and a half here to get your ducks in a row. The worst time to complain about the code is once it's already in effect. We try to do what we can, but as we're developing it, that's when we're best at listening. Afterwards, we're probably better at apologizing. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that too. We do rulemaking every 3 years and an intervening cycle every 18 months in between. And the participation in our rulemaking is overwhelmingly minimal. We have a lot of people, once the rules go into effect, that want to, I'm not going to say complain about it, but try to understand why. And the reason why is because we do the best we can. We're not experts in every area. Some of us do have our specialties, and we try to go through the model codes and see what has changed in them, what has changed in California law, and amend those codes to where everything coincides. But if we put out a suggestion of a code change and we don't hear any opposition to it, we assume there's no opposition to it. So I strongly encourage everybody to get involved in the rulemaking process early on. We are right now working on, we just finished had our 2022 codes adopted through the California Building Standards Commission, and we've just started working on the next intervening code cycle. I know Michael has been working with the California existing building code, trying to get a lot more of that adopted. And it's a long road. And the more support, the more reasoning we have for code changes from AIA or whoever it may be early on in the process, it just makes it a much better code product that we get it in the end.
Great points, Tom. I couldn't agree with you more. Anyone else? Greg, parting wisdom?
Well, I just have a couple of things now that you offered it to me. I'll send the ADU handbook to Rebecca so that anyone asks it at her end, she can send it, maybe just do a blast out to everyone. And it is in the process of being updated. At our webpage, just to assist any of your clients, your applicants, Cal HFA is now one source of funding for an ADU through a grant program that's been in effect since late September of this last year. I don't know how long it will run, but Cal HFA has up to $25,000 per site for ADU design, et cetera. The other item, really new news, it may address some of the questions here about occupancy and such. One of our primary ADU members of the legislature for ADU statute, Senator Wachowski, has just submitted a bill, 897, that will address fire sprinklers, occupancy, maybe a door between the JADU and the primary dwelling if the JADU doesn't have its own bathroom. Anyway, track it and since it clarifies the law, it probably warrants support.
Great job, everyone. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know
Thanks, everyone.
Got a million other things to be doing, and probably including eating lunch. But really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you all again at a future AI California event.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks all.